Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week we are speaking with master herbalist, ritual artist, and educator Catamara Rosarium. Catamara is the proprietor of Rosarium Blends and the co-founder of the Viridis Genii conference. She joins us today to talk all things plant magic. Catamara, welcome aboard.
Hi, Gordon. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you. Thank you very much for your time. And we will jump, as we always do, for the first-time guests, straight on into question number one. Kat, were you a weird kid?
Yeah, I guess I was. I mean, my family thought I was. I was adopted as a child, so I never really felt like I fit in with my family too much. And all of my interests were pretty far out there in regards to what a normal, average middle class family might be like. And so it took a while for them to realize that my interests were not a phase that I was going to grow out of, and that I was who I was. And I think kind of into my late teenage, early 20s, they started embracing my oddness rather than rejecting it. So that was really nice. And definitely in my adulthood, they accept me completely, which is nice. But it was challenging at times and never really fit in. I grew up in Arizona, and I always knew that I didn't really belong there, but I didn't really know where I belonged. And so when I was 15, I woke up one day, and I don't know if I had a dream or a premonition or what. I just said, I'm moving to Seattle. And I had no idea why. I'd never been there. And so I just kind of held on to that. And when I graduated from college, I moved here, or to Washington. I don't live in Seattle anymore, but I did for quite a while. And that's where I started feeling normal, I guess, and not quite the outcast and in a strange world. Everything started flowing here for the positive.
Yeah, we'll come back to, talking about why it was Washington to start with, because I think I've had a experience that is not the same, obviously, but kind of I can understand where you're coming from. But if we go back to those odd interests as a child, were they the kind of stuff that, was it an early expression of what you do now? Was it, magic stuff and plants and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I like a lot of kids, always played with the Ouija board and did the light as a feather, stiff as a board. And I was, addicted to horror movies as a child and anything dark and macabre and spooky and witchy in particular. I had ongoing dreams as a young child that were like continuations, but always of the same dream. And I never really understood that, but it was always me sitting in a boat traveling through these caverns with all this crazy, I didn't really understand it at the time, but I would say kind of, I don't know, what we might see in a movie or something, portraying witchcraft with symbols and what have you. But I never really understood it until I got a lot older and could find my path a little bit more. I had a hard time in Arizona. I was interested in the tarot, in divination. I dabbled a lot. It wasn't until just before I was moving here, I got involved with a Kabbalistic group that kind of sparked my interest at the time quite a bit. And I felt like I was finally finding something that made sense to me, but it didn't really happen until I got here to Washington.
That sense making can happen when you find something like that, even if that's not the right thing.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned the tarot cards. Are there any from that phase? Are there any books, even if they're no longer, on the nightstand? Are there any books or texts or tarot decks at the time that were quite, opening up for you?
Well, I started out with the Rider-Waite deck, and I, like many people, had this notion that you had to have your first tarot deck given to you, and you could never buy your own. And I don't know where that came from either. That was just some weird thing that I don't really necessarily believe to be true today, to be an authentic reader, or I don't think that you really have to have that happen. Later, I was given the Thoth deck, and I have a collection now of probably about 40 different decks, so it'd be hard to name them all. But the Rider-Waite was my first, and so with that came a couple workbooks. I don't actually remember what they're called anymore, but they were specifically geared for the Rider-Waite deck, and workbooks. So getting through those. And then with the Thoth deck, at the time, the Book of Thoth was way over my head in the beginning. And so I read Mirrors to the Soul, and I found that one to be quite useful. And sometimes I reflect back to that one, but it was also to go along with the Thoth, but it made a lot more sense than a lot of Crowley's. I don't know,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So here's where I wonder if there's not something similar in that journey to mine. Arizona is dry, and Washington is green. And if you look at how your life turned out, do you think there's something, because it was certainly the case for me, moving to progressively greener places. And do you think there's something in that kind of pulled you there to start with, or is it weirder or more profound?
Well, I used to, my family used to joke with me because I said I was only happy when it rained, and they would tease me with that song. I think it was by Hole or something like that. Anyway, and then I got here, and, it rains pretty much 9 months out of the year. And I really enjoyed that a lot. And definitely the fertileness of it and the changing of the seasons, and not something you get in Arizona. It's just dry and kind of boring. And where I grew up, it was just strip malls, and we went to nature a lot. My dad, it's kind of funny because he's a born-again Christian minister. And when I was a child, he actually taught me my first lesson in being a witch, I think. And that was teaching me how to listen to the wind, and talking to me a lot about reincarnation. And so it's funny because he rejects all of that now. But at any rate, I did get out into nature in Arizona. And had I stayed there, I would have had to go somewhere where it was greener for sure. So yeah, there's the wetness, the fertile land, the soil, the moss. There's something about the moss that I can't get over. The sun gleaming into the moss, and everything vibrates here, and very differently. It wasn't until I left there and went back after I really got into my herbal path where I could appreciate the flora and fauna in Arizona, actually, and could see it vibrating, whereas I didn't really notice it at all as a child,
That's another overlap then. It took me leaving Australia and coming back because I was going to open the question about Arizona versus Washington's green with not that Arizona doesn't have, or arid places don't have their own kind of stunning and stark way of existing, but I had the same thing. I had to leave and go to New Zealand, which is green and wet, and then England, which is of course green and wet, and then come back before
I see a trend with you there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, a lot of Australia is green and wet too, so I guess depends on where you're at.
That's true. I will be moving to some of the greener, wetter parts next year. So, I tried the sort of dry temperate, and it's lovely, but it's not for me.
Yeah, me neither. I can't. I feel I just get dried out when I'm there, and I don't feel very comfortable. And I find myself yearning for all the different colors of green too. It's
Absolutely.
Like they call Washington or Seattle the Emerald City, and it couldn't be a better name for it, really. So
nice. Well, picking that story back up, then you found a Kabbalistic group in Arizona, and you mentioned there were a few things like your father teaching you about, the wind and reincarnation and so on. But what was the kind of next step? How did you get into either identifying, because it sounds like the pieces were already there, or how did you get into more of the full-blown witchcraft? And did that happen in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, in Arizona, I went to a couple different pagan, Wiccan kind of groups that were teaching classes and trying to solicit new members kind of thing to entice them into getting into it. And I never really clicked or vibed with any of those groups. And upon coming to Washington, I did initially seek out the OTO, but I did not, at the time, the body here was not something I vibed with at all. It's changed quite a bit over the years. And so if they had been who they are today, then I might have gone down that road. But I chose not to at the time. And so I got involved in a couple different groups. One actually, ironically, was in Louisiana, and I don't think that they made it through Hurricane Katrina. So I don't think, but I wasn't involved with them any longer when that came to be. But they were an American witchcraft group. And then I had some people I worked with privately. And then I got into chaos magic, oddly, which was ironic because up until that point, I thought chaos magic was, I don't know, irresponsible, so to speak. I had a lot of misconceptions about it and had just met the wrong people that were involved with it. So I did that for a while. Still incorporate it in some ways into my personal practice, but it's definitely not my primary praxis. But my path working with plants and esoteric herbalism really just began through a friend of mine who had a business, and I was going to mentor under her, or she was going to mentor me, and I was going to streamline her business for her, and she was going to teach me while I was doing that, and then she moved away. And I realized while I was still doing this that I knew how to make her formulas, but I had no idea why I was doing it or what, oils or herbs or flowers or roots or, why they were in her particular formulas. So at that point, I decided to take a master herbalism program. And then that just opened up, wow. I mean, the path just kind of revealed itself all along the way to me. And I've done several things beyond that, since then, to get me where I am here.
So I think this is really cool that it happened in that direction. So tell us about, or do you have a memory of, if it's not the first personal concoction that wasn't one of the recipes from your friend, but was one of your own, like, do you have a memory of the first time you did this in a properly magical sense, presumably with timing and all that, and going, yeah, this is my jam, this is what I've been looking for?
Yeah, it was making ritual offering, like drinks, like tinctures that were witchy, so to speak. So things that were going to help me by partaking them as part of a ritual to rend the veil, so to speak, or journey, into the other realms. And so that, I mean, I had already been exposed to that some with this woman and the group that I was working with, but I had never done it on my own, like researched the plants myself and figured out why I wanted to put what I wanted to put into it and how they altered the senses. And so that's kind of how I started, was just making things that I needed for my own personal praxis. That goes along with incense, oil blends, ceremonial offerings, and definitely libations. I'm a big libation believer, gotcha. So to speak. It's not really the right word, but
you're a fan of libations.
I am, especially in ritual, because I don't think you need much to get you to a place, and it's the same thing with all of the senses. Once you've triggered them and you've done that, repeatedly, over and over again in your ritual praxis, then at some point you don't really actually even need them, or you can just smell them, or and it just gets you right there anyway, and so that was my.
And was that early kind of concoction or libation, was it psychedelic, or was it actually the magic of the plant spirits that, as you did this and it worked, you're like, oh yeah, this is for me?
I think it was all of the above. I've definitely experimented with psychedelic concoctions, and I have a formula that I work with all the time now that I call the Hecate's Keys, and that deals with 4 different poisons, and they're just, I can't really talk about how I prepare it per se, and I don't necessarily suggest people taking these poisons unless they know what they're doing, but
and how did you get from there into perfumes, and sort of why perfumes? I think they are probably under-examined in kind of contemporary Western magic as a thing to do. It wasn't always the case, but they are endlessly fascinating. So, why perfumes, and how did you move from drinks that allow you to talk to spirits and into that kind of world?
Well, perfume is the original offering to the gods. Whether, it didn't necessarily come out originally in an actual perfume as we know it today, but incense, woods, salves, ointments, they're all called perfumes. And so these are, the ancient Egyptians used them heavily in their praxis and spirituality and in death and dying and rebirth. And so perfume's not a far stretch. It wasn't until the development of essential oil distillation came to be where you could actually make what we know perfumes as today. But they're certainly good offerings, and they can elevate you in ways just like putting on an oil or burning an incense, especially when they're made talismanically, which is kind of my, it's my life. Everything I make revolves around particular astrological alignments and sabbats, or the days of the week, or the hours of the planets. It's kind of insane. The moon phase, waxing, waning, new moon, dark moon. There's not a moon. It pretty much dictates our entire life. Even when that comes down to we make mead too. In fact, we're going to be opening a small winery / meadery that will be with the emphasis on ritual offerings for sabbats and people have more witchy inclinations. And so even when it comes down to brewing that and starting a fermentation process, or it's all in accordance with this talismanic aspect of favorable times to be doing them, depending on what exactly it is that we're making and what its purpose is for.
And was that something that you encountered in the Master Herbalism course, or is it something that you kind of experimented with and augmented subsequently?
I would hope that anyone who's studying witchcraft or any of these pagan ways are going to naturally kind of get to understand the rhythms of the moon and the sabbats and esbats and what those mean. And even when you're trying to do your work, your magical work, your magical praxis, there's more benefic and malefic times to do each sort of operation that it is that you want to do. So it wasn't necessarily my Master Herbalism program, but that because of the one that I selected, which was with Paul Barrel, he had a Wiccan church of his own, and while I would not call myself Wiccan, and I was not part of his church, he did touch on magical herbalism within his curriculum, and so it definitely helped in a lot of the inspiration. As did I took a wort cunning incense class with Leon Reed out of Seattle, Washington. And that definitely is where I got introduced heavily into particular, like looking at the hours. I mean, I was familiar with them before, but I had never really dialed it in that significantly. And also I studied or study still herbal alchemy with Robert Bartlett. And that's a huge part of alchemy as well, practical alchemy. So,
and what is it typically the Agrippin planetary hours table, or I mean, do you use lunar days or lunar mansions as well? Is there, like, talk us through the components of the calendar, if you will?
I use the Chaldean calendar primarily. I am familiar with the lunar mansions, and that's a whole nother endeavor that I'm familiar with and I have embarked upon, but I don't necessarily utilize that specifically in my praxis because I'm not. I just haven't gone into the more of the lunar. I'm trying to remember exactly how that works. It's the lunar calendar instead of the solar calendar, so the hours do definitely vary a little bit differently.
They do. They're also, I mean, if you're talking lunar mansions and Picatrix, there are very specific talismans typically that you make on those particular lunar days, which probably doesn't have the flexibility to work with the kind of stuff you want to do, because that's like going to be the next question. So we have sort of planetary hours and obviously the wider space weather. So depending on if it's kind of to do with love or healing or what have you, you've kind of correlate those calendars and pick the right day for it. Is that generally the process of how it goes? And then at that point, is this when you, I don't know, you start steeping them? I mean, talk us through the kind of where the calendar and making something green match.
Absolutely. So I have a product line that was developed by my partner, Marcus McCoy, and myself called the Erotic Apothecary. And it's all herbal aphrodisiac-based products. And so we only make those on Friday, the day of Venus, ruled by Venus, preferably in the hour of Venus and never in a waning moon. So it needs to be right at the new moon. And if Friday falls on a new moon, then that's even better. And so we try to aim for that. If Venus is in retrograde, then we won't make it any of those products. So sometimes we might be out of stock for a while on those. Same goes with pretty much every incense and oil and perfume that I make. So it is definitely based on what planet is ruled.
The total space weather. For their premium members, because we do very similar things with Sigil Magic, they call them fruit machine days because you get your Venus line up in the day and in the hour and so on, and you jump. And it's very interesting to look at your Google Calendar over the next year or quarter and have these different hours spread across different months where you go, absolutely, you need to do this here. And it's been, for me, like we were talking about chaos magic and its general silliness. I'm sort of a prodigal ritual timer because it shouldn't work. And the sort of the foundational premises of chaos magic in the 80s would suggest that it doesn't, but it does. And so it took me 15 years to come back around to it. I mean, do you use similar timings for things outside of the creation of stuff? So do you say, well, this would actually be a really good day to sign a new lease or something?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we just bought a house in April and we had to wait until, if you want to get involved with that stuff when Mercury is in retrograde, then forget it, like it's just going to be chaos and it's probably not even going to work out. So I definitely look at, in those in my day-to-day practices too. Like, in fact, we're going to be looking for a, location to open our meadery, and I know that Mercury is about to go in its shadow phase around the time we're going to be getting back from a trip. And so I'm like, all right, well, we'll just do all that research and then we'll wait.
Yeah.
And then I think Saturn's going to be in Capricorn thereafter, and that's supposed to be really good too. So, I'm not an astrology expert by any stretch of the imagination. I know enough of the foundation to do the work that I do, but I definitely consult astrologers often for the work.
It is one of those things, actually very similar to what you do, which is there's some baseline stuff that everyone can and should do. But when it comes to it, it's like I could probably technically cut my hair. I shouldn't, you know.
Well, and I mean, in a pinch, if you have to do the work, you got to do the work. You know, it's not like if I have to do something where I need to manifest something quick, I'm not going to necessarily wait until this, you know, full on, what I like to call them power ups. So, you know, if you do wait, I mean, if it's something in my immediate life that I need, then I'm not going to sit around and wait for 5 months for the stars to align just perfectly to accomplish what I need to accomplish. Now, would it be better if I did wait? It might, but I might need it right now, not in 5 months, you know? And so you have to like kind of, you can't get too hung up in all that. But I think with like the products that I make for my business, it's pretty easy, you know, to look at all that and look at it in advance enough and know where you're at and where your supply levels are. And, oh no, yeah, this moon might be good, but this thing's going on with it. And that opposition isn't going to be good for, you know, Jupiter's in retrograde. So we don't want to have something that's all about manifestation or whatnot, if that's happening, sort of thing.
There's also other ways to skin the space cat. So if it's a Venusian operation that's internal, you can actually, if Mercury's better, you can do things that are kind of, you can come at it with a different angle, which is, okay, well, I will improve how I present rather than how I am. So you can, it's a very interesting language that I'm really, without even having to do things, people seem to think astrology is like the creation of natal charts for your friends. It's not. It's like it's just trying to find a calendar that makes your life work better, I suppose, is the way to think about it.
I agree. Absolutely. And the thing that's really neat too about understanding the planetary hours is what you said. So maybe that day of Venus isn't the best day and you want to work with the Mercury aspect instead, but then you could do it in the hour of Venus on that Wednesday, you know? So you're still getting it. It's just in a different way, you know?
So, I mean,
they're power-ups, you know, they're just things that are, I think, going to increase the odds of the effectiveness of your operation. They're not the absolute, though, you know.
So if people are listening to this and they're like, okay, well, I'm maybe not going to jump straight into kind of green alchemical stuff, but do you have texts or sites or something that you say, okay, well, if you want to just make sure you don't sign a lease on the wrong day, like do you have go-to books or websites that you tend to refer to for these things?
No, not really. I mean, I know how to figure out the planetary hours on my own, but I have a calculator that's online that I sometimes use. I do think it's important to understand how to how to make figure out those hours on your own, and also to test whether your online calculator or app that is on your phone is accurate or not. But other than that, no, it's just come from my knowledge. I mean, sometimes I'll look up transits, or I do subscribe to 2 different astrology newsletters, one from Austin Coppock and the other from Chani Nichols. And so I get those every new moon and every full moon, and then any time there's something coming up. And so those give a pretty good understanding of what's going on in the world. And not only just that, but also they have nice in-depth ways of looking at not just your sun sign. Like I think Chani has you read your sun sign and your rising sign, and Austin has you read your moon sign and your sun sign. And between both of those, I find that I'm pretty good with knowing what's going on, at least for me personally.
No, I think that's probably at about the level that I stay at, because you do generally know the kind of things that you have, not disasters, but the things that you have coming up in your life. If you are thinking about changing a job, or you need to redo a bedroom or whatever it is, look at getting the car replaced, that kind of stuff. You kind of know what's coming up So if you do get these sort of 1 to several month forecasts, you can shape important or at least expensive parts of your life so that you're minimizing the risk that they'll fuck up.
Yes. Minimization is grand. It's very important. Very helpful.
So,
and then too, there's always just getting a chart every year, a reading done of what your transits are going to be for the year. And that's helpful too, if you can afford to do that. I don't do it every year. There's times where I've reflected back in conversation with my astrologer friends where I'm like, oh man, this thing was going on, blah, 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 blah. And they'll be like, oh, was that, and they'll ramble off some big elaborate, trine or square or something that was going on. And I'm like, I don't know, let's look. And then of course they're right. And I'm just like, all right, well, that would have been helpful to know before or even just, sometimes it just adds ease to the impact, lessening the magnitude of it sometimes. So.
Yeah. Are you specifically referring to talking to Austin Know-It-All Coppock?
Oh,
because he does that to me.
Me out a lot over the years, for sure.
Yeah. He's amazing. But, he will also
Jen's
do that.
art. I also talk to Jen's art and consult her a lot too, and Eric Purdue. So I've got quite the. I feel like I've got a nice little arsenal of astrologists on my.
That's some good space nodes. Well done.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate with that, for sure.
All right, so jumping back down to the ground, how did you get started in Vegetalismo?
Wow, well, that's very interesting. I was at a conference in England. I'm trying to remember the name of it right now. Well, anyways, it doesn't matter. Oh, it was the Equinox Festival in England, and I met a speaker there who was speaking about San Pedro and ayahuasca and grandfather. I don't know why I'm peyote, and the things that he was saying was really were really vibing with me, and so I ended up asking him to come to Seattle and kind of teach me in these ways, and so he did, and that's kind of how that started.
Do you think? Because I've had, talking about curanderismo instead, but I've had Jesse Hathaway Diaz on a couple of times. And one of the things that I find very interesting about the indigenous American systems and how they match to non-European ones, contemporary non-European ones around the world, is that there's almost how to describe this, like a free market effect, where Jesse mentions when it comes to curanderismo, for instance, you might have a family connection, but actually if you're just good at it, like if you can demonstrate results for people, that's the thing that marks you out. And what interests me, I think, about Vegetalismo and the kind of where you sit in the overlap of herbalism with a capital H, that people might find a book on it in a normal store, and all the other components like the spirit component and astrology, is that the organic or the analog has its own way of standing out, if that makes sense. So it has its own way of. It's very difficult to describe a system when the system itself is one that's just, if it works, and if you're good at it, then that's the system. Does that make sense?
It does. For me, I found I really wanted to go down to South America for quite a long time and really study there more with shamans that were indigenous. But what I found with working through those medicines was that time and place and space was only confounded by our own illusion of what those things mean. And so just being able to navigate in those worlds, working with those medicines, really opened up a lot of I don't really like the word portal, but portals, avenues where I was able to see through those veils and see through into dimensions and multi-dimensions and multiverses within multiverses within multiverses, and understand and feel how those medicines working upon me. The one thing that I yearned for the most, though, was actually learning the song, songs that went with them. And I found that when I was involved in ceremonies where English was the preferred song, word for the songs, I felt like it really took away from my experience. Whereas if it was the actual songs that were being downloaded from the shamans, the icaros, I found a lot more, I found that to be more effective for my own personal journey. And so I didn't like other people's trip being instilled upon mine, so to speak.
Sure.
If that makes sense, like their overall.
Well, actually, that was going to be, because I asked the Vegetalismo question because it's been my personal experience. Well, I'll turn this into another question instead. Is the use of song and the experience with these particular medicines a form of relationship that improved or altered existing plant-spirit relationships you already had? Because that happened to me on, not my first or even my 10th psilocybin experience, but when I went in a proper ritual context in Amsterdam a few years ago, opened up a way of, I don't treat everything like psilocybin cubensis, but because of how that relationship went and the experience, and you mentioned portals, that was one of the tech pieces I got out of it, was this weird vine tunnel that I can use for journeying now. But because there's such intense interactions, are the learnings from that something that can inform other plant-spirit interactions?
Yeah, I definitely believe so, especially if you do dieta, along with that. If you are you familiar with dieta when I say that? So dieta would be going on a kind of a fast and a cleanse, and then it varies in length of time, but it's similar to that if you were going to be doing ayahuasca or something, and it'd be a couple of weeks. It's withstanding, just from a lot of particular things in your diet, meats and cheeses and anything that might affect. Just basically making yourself a pure vessel. Mm-hmm. So it's a cleanse or a fast. And then going ahead and working directly with one particular plant for an extended period of time and just kind of seeing what that plant has to teach you and offer you. The songs, yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I'm pondering it here as I'm trying to answer. The songs per se, the icaros that I have experienced weren't necessarily working with plants alone, an individual plant. It was just truly with the medicine. Sure. So I had not experienced them in this dieta setting that I'm speaking to you of, though I imagine they could.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
the plants teach the songs.
Yes. So that's sort of where but viscerally that there is that relationship available with plants that aren't, mushroom or San Pedro or what have you, because you've had those experiences.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I didn't know the word dieta, but the psilocybin experience I just referred to, I preceded it by a 8-day green juice fast, which was essentially just crushed up spinach, and it was deeply boring, and also a visit to the Hellfire Caves, and then the 2 days before it were a complete fast. So I didn't know the word dieta, but there you go. That was the intention I took to it, and I think obviously that's why the experience that time was probably the most impressive or most profound interaction with psilocybin cubensis I'd had, because I showed up as best I could.
Yeah, I think anytime you purify your body, that's an offering in and of itself. And so you're creating yourself a house for the plants. You are the vessel for the house for the plant to live in, to come in and teach you what it has to teach you. So for sure, if the cleaner you are, the better you're going to be. You're going to receive those teachings. I definitely believe that.
So in this kind of career doesn't seem the right word for it, but in this kind of journey, when do you start growing your own?
Growing my own what?
Oh, just anything. I'm aware, well, tell us about the poison garden, for instance.
Oh, well, so we've moved recently, so my poison garden is all in pots, unfortunately. But I've got them. I do have them. They talk to me. I work with them. I watch them through all seasons of the year. I commune with them in each season through every part of them. So vine, fruit, flower, leaf, roots, what have you, or in some of their cases, their rhizomes or what, however it is that they grow, how they propagate. They have teachings of themselves. Just sitting in a garden full of these plants will teach you more than you even need to know. Not more than you need to know, but they'll teach you a lot of what you might need to learn from them. And what I have experienced, though, is that a lot of them, the lesson is different for every person. It's not always the same. Though there are usually currents that are similar. So,
and is there a set of, and this is kind of related to the Vegetalismo question, is there a set of protocols? Let's say you're bringing a new potential ally into the garden. How do you begin that approach?
I usually. Are you talking about like where to place them, or
just in general? So I've bought a property recently as well, which I don't currently live on, but within 5 years it's going to be pretty poisonous. Do you have a way, kind of like we're referring to with the dieta? Like, do you have a way of commencing the journey with a particular ally from either picking a worthwhile seed company that does heritage organic seeds and or what have you? Like, is there a process of bringing something into the garden, like a new pet, for instance? Like, right. How do we begin this journey? How do we begin the teaching or at least interaction process?
So sometimes, it can vary for sure. Sometimes I will be at a garden store and they happen to have that plant. Ironically, aconite is very common here in the Pacific Northwest, so it's very easy to go buy a myriad of species of them, but you can still get aconitum, no problem. I've not actually, and same with devil's or angel's trumpet, datura. Sometimes you can get species already here. There are a few online stores that tend to sell more of those poisonous plants that I've bought from before, and they'll just ship them straight to me. I have grown things from seed. I try to, anything I'm growing from seed, I try to do kind of starting around the spring equinox into Beltane, and then, with hopes that they'll be strong enough to plant somewhere between Beltane and the summer solstice. And again, I look at whatever planet I feel that plant is best in alignment with, and I'll try to pick that day or a particular moon to plant it. Usually a new moon versus harvesting. I harvest quite often on a full moon, but I'll do new moons too. So, and then as far as where I'm going to plant them, I just talk to the plant. Really, I'll hold them and I'll do body divination with them. It's kind of like a pendulum trick where your body is a pendulum. And I will hold the plant and just start asking questions. And then whichever way my body moves with the plant, then those are my answers. There's usually pretty much a yes or a no. It's pretty cut, pretty clear. Sometimes you get kind of a hazy maybe. that might work, maybe that won't work. And sometimes I just get straight out answers from them that, I download that I don't even need to, I just know. They're like, yeah, I want to be there. Even one time I had a property I had to move away from, and I was pulling up a lot of my plants, and I just asked each one of them which one wanted to come with me and which one didn't. And the only one that wanted to stay was wormwood, ironically. And I thought, well, that's fitting. That works. Wormwood, you can stay. And I was okay with that too. I don't ever want to pull a plant from a place that it's happy. But if it wants to come with me, then, I'm all for it. I'll do what I can. Plants do want to be in the ground though. They really don't like the pots. They'll do what they can in there, but I find they flourish much, much greater, when they're in there. They're just free to spread their roots and be in their place as opposed to a confined space.
And just generally, being part of a wider system, you're more likely to have that kind of microorganism interaction and all the other kind of things if they're in the ground. Do you have, for people who are listening who are like, all right, do you have some sort of macro suggestions of things that people may wish to look into for their own gardens? And conversely, do you have definitely don't start with henbane or something?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned henbane, because henbane and we get along, but for some reason I just can't keep that plant happy. It makes me really sad because I've grown it from seed, and then it'll become a little seedling, and it doesn't, it's just been a challenge. We were given a plant this year at our symposium, and I brought it home, and it was super happy, and then it got mites, and so then we tried to treat the mites, and then I thought we had that all worked out, and then new growth was happening, and I was super excited. I'm like, oh, I might actually see a flower, and now, it's really not happy. I've put it into a new pot recently, and I don't know, we'll see if it survives. But yeah, henbane's he's a tricky one. I would never suggest anyone not try to grow anything, to be honest. I mean, that's part of esoteric herbalism is figuring this shit out, it's hard and it's a struggle and it's a challenge, but it's really fascinating and interesting to look at the plants from year to year and see, how they're doing or why they're producing more fruit this year or versus the year before, or, it's just part of the praxis, I think, of the work of working with plants. And I can't say that there's anything you shouldn't try to grow unless it doesn't grow good in your bioregion.
Sure.
Then that becomes a challenge. I mean, we have San Pedros, they're in pots, and they have to go in our greenhouse, which we're finishing up right now. It's starting to get cold here, and they will die, if they freeze in the winter. In fact, all our potted plants are going to have to go in there as soon as we get it together. But if you want to plant a poison garden, I say go for it. And if you can start it from seed and figure out how to propagate the seeds, that's a really interesting task. So if you can find the plants, and they're going to respond by the energy that you give them.
Absolutely. That is, because I have one of the questions towards the end here, which is, if you could kind of wave a wand over the magical community, what would you like them to spend more time on or learn? And my cheat answer was essentially going to be that, which is do it from the beginning, and even the stuff that you don't think is magic, which is propagation techniques and what thing likes what soil and all that kind of stuff. That's magic.
It is, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the pillars of esoteric herbalism, just being a gardener, understanding, being able to caretake for a plant, it is a lot of work and it can be deeply frustrating sometimes, but it's also really rewarding, especially when you get to watch them through full life cycles and die and be reborn again each year, depending on what the plant is and if they're going to do, if that's their their nature or not. Or sometimes you've got annuals that come back and you're like, wait, you weren't supposed to come back, but you did,
Yeah.
Not serious. Why'd you come back? And, oh, hey, I get you for 3 years, but now you're done. Okay, well, that was fun.
I have this utopian fantasy of, because I think this is kind of something that is in an uptrend, which is good. But I have this utopian fantasy of a diversity of different magical species grown in, up to 1,000 households, particularly in the US, but just generally wherever good Western magic is found. Because there are some plants, for instance, I'm aware that high john isn't what used to be a kind of wild ground covering. There's just not that much of it left. And there are a couple of hundred things that could do with more homes and more partners just to kind of exist and interact with the community, which is now big enough to support that. Like, if you consider the number of people who go to conferences like yours, which we're about to talk about, if everyone went home and had 5 different things and they were different to each other, then all of a sudden, what can be quite a rare and essential ally for magic, its future looks brighter.
It does. And it's interesting because there's a lot of plants that are very hard to find. Speaking just from my personal business, I certainly cannot grow the abundance that I need personally to make all of the various concoctions that I do, although I would be lying if I said we didn't go out and wildcraft lots of things. Sure. And for our own purposes, that are especially things that are here in our own bioregion in abundance. I would never pay for that, but there's a lot. I tend to get myself involved in projects where I go down a rabbit hole where I'm like, oh man, why am I doing this? Because how on earth am I going to find all of these plants that I need that grow in India and don't grow here? And it's not even that they just grow in India. It's just not something that people in India even necessarily consider valuable or would harvest in that way, in the way that I consider them valuable. And so it's always a quandary when I find myself in these projects. There's I know of one plant in particular, devil's shoestring. If somebody wanted to make a devil's shoestring farm, there'd be a lot of hoodoo people looking for devil's shoestring.
Yeah, I agree. I think that about a lot of the kind of traditional sort of American herbalism and hoodoo things. And it just seems there's an opportunity. Obviously, you're kind of latitudinally range-bound with a lot of them. But, in theory, you can grow... high john can grow up walls, like it's a ground cover, but you can run it up fences, and you think it's just... It should be in a couple of hundred homes, and I find that kind of thing interesting. I think we'll get there. I think we have the opportunity in the next 10 years of having some kind of astral farm of people who are interconnected in it, and I think it's quite an encouraging possibility.
Did you say an astral farm?
Astral, as in like the farm isn't located in the one physical place. It's right. 60 suburban backyards. That would be kind of cool. Yeah,
we should start an alliance for people who want to grow the astral farmers. We could start a whole new movement.
Exactly.
I think I'm onto something there. Actually,
well, yeah. But let's talk about. You mentioned you wild harvest some of the stuff. Is that something else that you think, assuming you live in even in any area, is that something that you think is another maybe underexplored skill, even if it, and I say just around this, even if it is just collecting weeds for a salad, is this something that you would recommend for people who are kind of really vibing with this discussion to look into?
Absolutely. You're familiar with the dandelion, right?
Oh,
everybody. Yeah. Dandelion's a common weed. Everybody wants to poison it and mow it out of their lawns, and it has so much medicine in it, and it's highly magical. And it's also like the first food, at least here, for the bees, which are very important. So it it's very frustrating every year when I hear about people. Oh, I got to get rid of those pesky dandelions, and I there's a whole sect of herbalists who believe that weeds that are growing around you are actually medicines that you need in your life. And so I think that's a really important thing to take a look at. And so when you're like, your yard's full of horsetail, for instance, that is really hard to get rid of. But it's like, well, why is it here? Why is it hanging out in my yard? Why do I need it? Why are the dandelions here? Maybe I need that in my diet. I mean, dandelion, you can eat 3 leaves of the dandelion plant and get your daily recommended dose of vitamin C, just like that, just going out there and eating that. Can eat the flower heads. You can put you can make vinegars and salad dressings and salad and pesto even from dandelion. Or people are really into making pesto with nettle. Nettle's everywhere. It's an abundance. It's not going to, if everyone's out there, and that's the thing, though, I do have to caution people is understanding what's in abundance and what's not. So not over harvesting. That's a really important thing to keep in mind, because you want to make sure the plant's going to come back, never take anything more than you need.
And also don't go wild harvesting where the council sprays. It's true. And I thought that once about dandelion too, but I've learned, spray, yes. But a lot of people may argue with me on this point, but a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to harvest the dandelions that are growing by roadsides and stuff, but they produce what they need to produce to clean all of those poisons out of their system. So they're just fine. It doesn't really matter. Now, if they've been sprayed with herbicides, that's another thing that I don't know for sure. But by the side of the road is fine, especially if you wash them. I have, especially right now, as we head out of winter. I have an abundance of them in the yard. My little French nephew was over on the weekend, and so we were just eating them in front of him and blowing his tiny mind, because it does look kind of like just weeds in a really crappy lawn, because I don't care for the lawn. Really, It's more a dandelion patch when I think about it.
Well, and you can make wine from that too.
There you go.
Really wonderful wine, as a matter of fact. So we just made some last year. We called them Tears of the Lion. So anyway,
is that going to be in the meadery?
When we can harvest it. Like, we didn't get around to harvesting any this year because we were moving during the time of the harvest, and it was just too crazy. But pretty much everything that we'll be making is seasonal to our bioregion. If it's got a flower or a fruit, and things that we typically go out and harvest ourselves, but sometimes we do cheat and buy some.
Yeah, gotta do it.
We call them hedge wines. So
nice. Yeah. So speaking of things you've got on, talk us. What's the Viridis Genii project?
Oh, the Viridis Genii Symposium is an amazing event that my partner Marcus McCoy and I put on together. And it's about plant magic, mysticism, and medicine, with an emphasis on the magic. So, the ethnobotany of magic. There's a lot of herbal conferences going on all over the place that barely scratch upon this part that's really a large part of where herbalism, how it even came to be. And so we kind of felt like even these herbal conferences they're kind of becoming like Western medicine, and very allopathic focused, even though herbal medicine's not supposed to be about that at all. And
which is to say they focus on active compounds in turmeric and whatever. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. So rather than us talking about the magic of turmeric and the folklore of turmeric, and I mean, I can't tell you specifically any of that offhand at the moment, if you were to ask me, but that is a very good example, because that is hugely talked about. But it'd be really interesting if somebody spent the time to research what its folklore was, and every plant has a story in just about every tradition, and some of them are used similarly, and some of them are not, but they're all used as widely, as part of their own personal tribal practices from the beginning. I mean, and not even just tribal, just folklore. Whether it was a hedge witch or the cunning sorcerer or what have you, and all of these plants also, interestingly enough, can be used in blessing and in bane. And so I think a lot of people they lose sight of this, and I don't know if it's just not interesting to them, but it's kind of how all of this medicine started.
Speaking of Austin, we've had a similar conversation about astrology, which there may be a bit ahead in sort of re-haunting it, because, maybe the last few decades of the 20th century, astrology was trying to pretend to be some sort of transpersonal psychology, or in really bad instances, like crappy science. But it's magic. Like it works because it's a way of being in a magical world. And I think that about, what we currently call herbalism, even the word herbalism is in some sense a hijack of the status of these plants within different cultures. So our culture, or Indian culture, or whatever you like. It's a hijack of their story and their status, and a diminution. If you do it wrong, if you do it right, it is one of the fastest, if not the fastest, ways to actually personally re-enchant your world is to know the stories of the plants in your life.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of information out there. And so that's really the primary focus of this event, is to bring this awareness to people who are drawn to this path. And even some people, we have this amazing logo. And it's interesting because I'll be out vending at markets and stuff for my own business, Rosarium Blends, and I'll bring the poster with me or the flyers, and I'll find people just standing there staring at the poster, and they don't even know why, And I'll say, hey, so, are you familiar with this event? And they're like, no, I'm just staring at this, this beautiful logo that you've created, and I don't even understand why. And so then I'll start talking to them about the event, and they're just blown away, and so I think there's a really huge current of people who are thriving and striving for this information. They just don't know where to find it. And so we're trying to foster an environment that's conducive for people to have access to this learning. And so we're coming upon our fourth event, which is going to be on July 6th, 7th, and 8th of 2018, and hosted in Eatonville, Washington. We just had to change locations, and we're really excited about this new one. And we have a current call for proposals, and our deadline is November 28th. So if anyone's interested in these subject matters, I definitely encourage you or them to submit us a proposal, even if distance is a problem. There's always things that can be.
It's better to get it in than not. Like, don't count yourself out as a result. I think that's wise, because I have the book from the third conference, and what you're saying about the focus on magic really is a focus on its magic and its ethnobotany, and it is quite deep. It's not, as you say, maybe not the more, I don't even want to call it materialist, but the less enchanted herbal conferences, or that you may be thinking of. And it's quite a wide net. So you have, at least in this book, and I know what you mean about the logo now, because I actually found it quite compelling looking at it myself. But you have the role of different plants in American hoodoo and folklore and actual use in magic, and it gets quite deep. So for people, it's a magic podcast for people who are like, if this is their jam, or if you have some expertise you'd like to share, this is a second for me to send the proposals in.
Yeah, please. We encourage it. The more the merrier. And yeah, that's another good point. Our books, there's nothing really like them. They're anthologies. And no, I guess there are some conferences that have typically academic events will often have a conference proceedings for their event. And so what we've done here with our books, who are now being published by Revelor Press, they're proceedings. So we are having anyone who's speaking at our event also submit an article for consideration. Not always does every article make it in for various reasons. Either, there's just various reasons why that may not happen, deadlines, etc. But we really want to have something to offer to the public, especially if they can't make it to the event, to where they can read about what happened there and what was learned there, and kind of a further exploration of what maybe somebody's presentation topic was about or their workshop topic was about, and also as a memoir. So if you were there, then you get this book, and you don't have to be like, oh man, I forgot to take that note. Yeah,
you're definitely referring to me. Yeah.
Me too, So it's a pretty special thing. The Revelor Press has really been a huge support in helping us manifest that vision, because it's pretty cool and it's neat. We have them out by the day of the conference, and so people can take them home as keepsakes, and then we do a pre-order also, so people who can't be there for the conference, Jen from Revelor, she tries her best to actually even get the pre-orders out so that they receive it the day or weekend of the conference, so they can kind of, I don't know, feel like maybe they're there too.
Well, that's magical timing. I like that. That works. Yeah. But I was expecting the book to be, and I would have been happy with this, I was expecting it to be conference proceedings, but it's an actual book of, collected essays of people who know what they're talking about what they know. I think it's an excellent kind of, it's halfway to academia, but it's better. I think there's some processes in academia that are a good match for this kind of dominant of witchcraft era that we're in, and I really like the combination you guys have worked out.
Thank you. Yeah, we're pretty happy about it, and I have to say, I wish books like this would have been available for me 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like now, when I'm vending forever, people were like, "How do I get into this? What got you started?" And I'm like, "Well, have you heard about the Symposium? Have you, here are 3 books. See if you're inspired. See what transpires from what you receive by reading these articles. And not only that, I've started selling all sorts of other crazy books. But anyway, it's cool. It's been a very fun road for us, and we've built this community that is very special. There's nothing else like it anywhere, and it didn't exist before. And so every year we see new faces and familiar faces, and it's just kind of this amazing opportunity for networking and camaraderie and learning, and it's a creation of a culture in and of itself. So it's pretty special.
Propagation of knowledge. I like it. We'll use a nice gardening term there.
Yes, I think I might write that down and use it somewhere.
So for people who do actually want to get into this stuff, because Kat, this has been a great chat. I've been very much looking forward to this. But for people who want to know more about the kind of stuff that you offer and so on, like, tell us a bit about Rosarium Blends and where they can go and to find out more and buy some stuff.
So my business is Rosarium Blends, and the URL is rosariumblends.com. Pretty straightforward. And I've got a myriad of ritual incense blends, essential oil blends, talismanic perfumes, the erotic apothecary line that I mentioned earlier. I offer candle services and other consultations as well. Also, we've now, in the last year, started selling quite a huge array of occult books that we curate specifically. It's not like walking into a bookstore and just being like, oh shit, what do I buy? Here's a bunch of Llewellyn 101 books. No offense to Llewellyn, but a bunch of books where people are like, oh yay, here's the same book on Wicca that has been rewrote 50 times. It's like, here's like the real deal kind of thing. And so we take a lot of pride in the books that we sell. Primarily it's Inner Traditions and Troy Books and Three Hands Press, and I think that's it in our books so far. It's hard. The books are kind of taking over.
Oh, well, that's good.
And also the Lucky Mojo Hoodoo books. We have a huge library of those, and people are super, super into those because they're quick and easy, and they just cut to the chase and what have you.
Nice. Well, of course, all of these places, the conference details and where you can buy the book and Rosarium Blends and so on will be in the show notes for people listening.
Oh, great. So you have our viridisgenii.com, and
I do.
Because nobody knows how to spell that.
Yeah.
No offense. We had to pick the Latin here, and it gets...
No, that will all be there. That'll be in the show notes and on the blog. So, Kat, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. I love talking about this stuff, and good luck with the repotting of the poison garden, and good subsequent luck with the conference.
Thank you so much, Gordon. It's been a pleasure.
I love a good plant chat. Weeds, poison, psychedelics, it's all good. And if this sort of thing is your hedgerow jam from either a professional or serious research perspective, be sure to check out the show notes for links to the Viridis Genii conference and submit a proposal for next year. Speaking of proposals, may I propose you head over to runesoup.com and check out the archive of previous episodes. Lots of similar talks to this kind of thing over there. Subscribe, tell your friends, follow on Facebook, all that good stuff. And of course, find me on Twitter where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.